He is a lifelong resident of Manitowoc and has 23 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, 4 of which were spent with his own business, 16 years with the city, Manitowoc Building Inspection Department, and in his free time we're told that he dedicates himself to college and high school athletics for the past 30 years. So Rick, I guess good way to go, and please welcome Rick. And if I could, right away, I'll give you Kelly Bublitz's bio as well. She is our compliance assistant specialist out of the Appleton office. She has been a compliance assistant specialist for about 4 years. Compliance officer for 10, maybe some of you know her, I don't know, maybe in that. But both positions are out of the Appleton office. She specializes in construction and general industry safety and has conducted over 1,000 OSHA inspections. And Kelly also has 15 years of active duty in the U.S. Navy, so we got a couple of good experts on hand, so I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone, gentlemen and ladies. We start this out with, what does building inspection do when we're not doing inspections? I think there's a common thought out there, and I call it a fallacy, that there's no construction, we haven't had any 1- and 2-family new homes, so we're not busy. Well, I'll get to the list of what we all do in the building inspection department. I want to start with giving you a background. Most of you probably know this, but for those of you who don't, in January 1st, 2011, excuse me, 12, starting in 12, Common Council and the mayor cut the building inspection department, and we were probably, I think we were the deepest one cut, the deepest department. That we had a director, deputy director, secretary, all full-time plumbing inspector, full-time housing inspector, and a full-time electrical and plumbing inspector. So there was 6 of us. And they took away the director. They kept him on with the city. They moved him from building inspection to the transit system. And then the former transit system person, they just let go. So he found a job in Sheboygan. So director went from building inspection to transit. Deputy director, which was me, they changed my title and made me building inspector. They let the electrical inspector go first of the year, replaced him right away with a half-time inspector, 20 hours a week. At least that person has a full-time employment with the city. That's Mark DeZale. He's half-time electrical inspector. The other half is he works for DPW, and he's the city electrician. And then the plumbing inspector, they put him at half-time. So by about the 1st of March, he decided to retire. So we were without a plumbing inspector. And about the end of April, we got a new plumbing inspector on board. Luckily, we got one on board because we were hiring him as half-time. And we had 3 applications for that position. So, and they kept our secretary full-time, but changed her to secretary of 3 departments. So she was literally running from downstairs in building inspection, main level, to the planning department, and the upper level to the assessor's office. So because she was running so much, that was just crazy. So we, building inspection went from the lower level to the main level, and we kind of bunched up with the planning department, physically in that department. So that left Lisa, our secretary, with, at least she didn't have to run around. And then he brought the assessor down from the 2nd level and put her on the main level also. So that helped a little bit. She didn't have to continue her exercise program. So, bottom line, building inspection had 6 full-time employees, and we went to 2 1/3. And then I was left as the only building inspector. That encapsulates anything. I mean, you guys know, from the phone calls that come in, and then when you do get the job, then there's plan review, and if there's something that has to go back to you, I mean, it's just redundant work. So that's part of our change, and I'll get to that too with the plan review. So we had last, and I'll get back to some of this, but last year was kind of a down year. And again, that misconception that it was a down year. We had 15 residential new construction projects. 9 of them were single family, 5 were 2 family, and then we had 1 16-unit out on Expo. So that is down somewhat. The other thing the council wants us to do is get cross-trained. And we always did have enough work to have a specific, the director and deputy director always had the commercial and the residential credentials from the state to do those inspections. Now they want all of us to get cross-trained in everything. They didn't mention the commercial part, but certainly residential, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, all those. So that's not an easy task. So given the size of our department now, trying to get all those inspections, all that paperwork done, now they want us to get cross-trained too. I won't say what I say under my breath about that. It's not easy. It's just, and to try to train 2 totally new employees, those 2 part-time guys, plumbing and electrical, to try to get that in there along with all their training, along with housing code issues. Housing code issues are things like neighbor problems, garbage, junk cars, tenant-landlord issues, when there's feuds between neighbors. If it's not a police matter, it's a building inspection matter. So that's part of the cross-training part, and it's just, as you can imagine, it's not just total black and white. It's like every situation in a housing code issue is different. Some you get that cleaned up in 24 hours for citation. Others situations, they might be, we'll give you the weekend, we'll give you a week to do that. Things like that. Some of the housing, the number of residential starts, I think that was 15. Commercial projects, there was 96 commercial projects in 2012. And that additions, I'm going to name 9 of them, just to give you an idea of the dollar amounts in that. Panda Express was $340,000 job. Bank First National had a 2nd floor renovation. They were $428,000. The new Powers Tire out on Dewey, $435,000. I'm going up to the top here. Manitowoc Tool and Machine had an addition, $500,000. AmeriCollect, $544,000. 4 East at Holy Family was almost $1 million. And the intermodal transfer station, that was just under $1 million. But that's okay because that was federal money.
You're welcome.
Bailey Construction was the number 2, and that was 1.8 million. They doubled their size. That was a big project too. And top vote getter was 5.6 million. Anybody know? Silver Lake College. Yeah. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the commercial versus residential projects. I relay that to like baseball and softball. They're both the same game, but when you compare residential to commercial. Commercial is baseball. Residential is softball. I mean, like I said, it's the same game, but there's a lot of differences in the game. And once in a while, I get someone comes in that is primarily accustomed to residential, and they have an opportunity to do a commercial project. And the expectations, I think, when you come in, it might be just kind of the same as a residential job. Here's a plan, here's what they want to do, and this is what it costs, and give them a permit. When you go commercial, it's architects and professional surveys and lot lines, and it just gets really a lot more involved. So I just say that to make you aware, if you ever do get on the commercial side of things, there's a lot more involved. Kind of jumping around, but I'm going to go back to that housing code issue where with the garbage situation. A few years ago, director in our office and the housing inspector were on board with this. I was against it. What they wanted to do is propose to the council to have citywide garbage pickup. And the reason I was against it is it takes an extremely a lot of time from our department. And the reason I was against it is because to me, it makes that tenant irresponsible, more irresponsible than what they are. They don't know how to take care of their garbage, and they just don't take care of their garbage. And then the city has to come over there and tell them to pick it up and get rid of it. So I had one incident where it was over on South 35th Street. I had to go over there, told them to pick their garbage up, take care of it. Went back a week later, because I always have to verify those things so I can get it off the record. And they still didn't have it picked up. And I was a little irritated that day. Kind of not physically wailing on the guy, but verbally a little bit. And he's, well, where I came from, they picked it up for us. I said, what do you mean they picked it up for you? Who's they? And he came from Stevens Point, and Stevens Point has a citywide pickup. So if you can put your garbage out there, they'll take it. But that's why I was against it. The other two guys were for it because it would free up more of our time. But I think if you have citywide pickup, it's going to cost more in taxes. So. Okay, some other things that goes on in the building inspection department. I've mentioned all the commercial and the residential buildings, additions, new projects, things like that. Signs. Any sign that you see in the city comes through building inspection. Whether it's regular signs, any sign, animated, non-animated. The animated signs are more of a project because they have to go through the inspection and the planning department for approval. So, and there's permits issued for that. About 4 years ago, we implemented a fence permit. What was happening was when you in the sections of town, you get two neighbors, two houses that are close together, and their driveways, they're either sharing a driveway, or if their driveways are right adjacent to each other, people would put up what we call a spike fence. They don't get along with their neighbor, put up a fence. Now that neighbor tries to open up his car door and can't get out that side. So that's why we created permit for a fence. There's no fee, but there's a permit, just so it gets reviewed. So theoretically, every fence that goes up now requires a permit.
Rick, I got a question for you. In that situation, what are you gonna do with that? I mean, because they're allowed to build a fence, right? They own any of the imaginary space from a plane on the ground all the way through to the sky.
Right?
So they have the right to put that there, don't they? Or they have to set that?
They have to have a setback. If your driveway edge is less than 2 feet parallel with the lot line, you have to keep that fence off of that lot line by at least 2 feet.
Okay.
So we've denied a few of them already because of that.
What constitutes a fence? I've seen a situation where they had rods just set down. There was nothing crosswise.
Well, if they're putting it for the purpose of spiting their neighbor, we'll have a talk with them.
Okay.
Demolition of structures, there's a permit for raising buildings, and we have an application form for that. And if it's a commercial building, again, a lot more involved with that, asbestos, and there's things on there, there's asbestos and, what's the other one I'm trying to think of?
Lead-based paints?
Lead, yeah. The critical part is the asbestos part in those. Condemnation proceedings, we could have some of those, but on the other hand, we can't because there's no money in the budget. Last year, there was no money in the budget to condemn any buildings. So, I was kidding with someone, I said, this year I'm gonna put $50,000 in that budget line for condemnation purposes, but, yeah, it'll get booted out, I know, but I try to get that across, that there's properties out there that are worth raising. Moving of structures, anytime a building, whether it's a single car garage or a building, if it's out of the city, well, actually, if it's out of the city coming in, if it's in the city, coming in the city, staying in the city, we have to go out and check out that building to make sure it's going to be conducive for wherever it's going to be located. Occupancy permits, that you all probably know what that is after a building is completed, final inspection. We either issue a temporary occupancy permit, and like 99% of the time it's a temporary occupancy because there's always something, whether it's like now I did a final inspection on a residential today. Obviously the landscaping wasn't done, so we give a temporary occupancy so they can legally occupy it. And then back, in June or July, we'll go back and verify that landscaping is done. Then we'll issue the full occupancy. Floodplains, wetlands, airport height limitations, that all comes through building inspection. And that doesn't happen real often. You'll see the last one I had was Bailey. So now there's going to be competition between Bailey and Stocks Harley Davidson. You want to put up a flagpole. The highest one he could put up. So he says, the guy that's putting it up says, I'll be down the highway a little bit. He said, pretty soon Stock will, it's crazy. It's like they're in competition. They want the highest flagpole. Zoning districts and requirements and permitted uses. All the zoning. If you've been in our office, you'll see this map of the city of Manitowoc, and it's got all different colors on it. Those are the different zones. There's 7 different residential zones, there's a commercial zone, and then 2 industrial zones. And each one of those zones has a specific use. that you can't put a residential home in an industrial zone. So there's things like that. Certain uses in specific zones and setbacks are different from each zone. So basically what it comes down to is the planning department, Dave Less, in this case, writes the rules, writes the code, and building inspection is the enforcer of all the codes. That's how that procedure works. Here's something that, because of our cutbacks, that hasn't been done the last 2 years now, is licensing inspections. Any liquor license, any business that has a liquor license is supposed to be inspected annually. Also, annual inspections are required for any rooming houses or any residential that is 3 apartments or more. Everyone annually inspected. Obviously, we didn't get at that this year or last year. Just impossible.
Rick, can I add a comment to it? Sure. Based on that, when Rick and I have talked, we had stated that the building inspection department is the only really department that generates income into the city. Yet they're the ones that had all their staff cut. So all the money we raise in permits, technically should have stayed in the building department section, goes in the general budget, and so they operate, positive, and yet they were least cut. Because if you just read down every list that you have that you do, you'd be here all night talking about it.
Mm-hmm. These are the kind of the highlights. And this is not to mention all the walk-in traffic and the phone calls and the emails. It's a little busy. When we had those six employees, we had a property maintenance program. And what that was as part of this, we were trying to alleviate, we were trying to get ahead of the game on that housing code issue with safety items. And in the middle of that, that's when we were cut. So we just had to disperse that. What we were doing was we take an area of the city. We started in I'll call it I'll say the older part of the city, and we'd go to every house. There were three inspectors at that time. We'd go to every house, and it was just a safety, quick, walk the sidewalk, look at the house, if they got a bad porch, steps are dilapidated, or the roof was, you could see a rotten spot on top or bottom. It was just basic safety issues. And write it up, and send a letter out. It was really going well. It was. And I thought if we could get that, nip that before it causes a problem, or wait until it gets worse and it costs the homeowner more, nip that in the bud and they take care of it. And that is something then later on that wouldn't come through as a housing code issue or landlord issues, landlord-tenant issues. But it's just the opposite is happening now. Where I've got a stack of this high on my desk of housing code issues, and some of those are garbage, some of those are building issues that I haven't got to these, and so it's just making things worse out there, is what it's doing. And trash breeds trash. And if somebody's out there letting their house go over here, it's the neighbor down the block is, why should I take care of mine? Why should I take care of mine? That guy's not taking care of his. Just the opposite happens also. If somebody on the block starts cleaning up their house and new siding here, and redoes their porch over there, that breeds as well. And I've seen it. I've seen that happen. It's the same thing if a guy leaves a junk car in his backyard. somebody down the block gets the impression that, oh, I can leave my car there. No, that's why this housing program was going good. Hopefully someday we can get that back. I brought the code book along in case anybody wants to. I guess I don't have something on top of my head if you have questions. The commercial code, we use the Wisconsin's version of the IBC, the International Building Code. The UDC for Residential Uniform Dwelling Code, which then our municipal code, chapter 16, adopts the UBC, Uniform Building Code. And so, in all these things, and of course the electrical is the National Electric Code, and pretty much what building inspection deals with in the municipal codes is chapters 15, 16, 17, and 18. And that's where, what I've talked about, that's where all those codes are. So, and they're all online. And speaking of online, and again, and with our reduction in staff, Lisa in the front office and I, we're trying to gear more people to look that stuff up on their own. Because trying to reduce some phone calls and do it that way. It's just, this week, I was on vacation last week and I came back this week and obviously the piles were bigger, but yesterday and today, it was just like somebody flipped the switch. The phone calls, it's just going crazy. But we had our first new house today. First new single family. But this one's there's typically 5 inspections. If everything goes perfect on inspections, there's like 5 inspections on a new home. Footing, foundation, rough in, insulation, and final. But this one we got today is going to be, I know it's going to be at least 10. I haven't had one of these in a long time. It's from the guy who's going to build it is going to live there. So by code, UDC code, he does not have to have the credentials from the state to be a contractor. So he's building it himself.
Really?
And the UDC allows 24 months to get it done. I'm thinking he might charge.
More if you have to do 10 inspections.
I gotta find somewhere what it says about what do we do if it takes me 24 months.
Hey Rick, in Valders, I pulled a permit today. For each inspection, I have to pay $50.
Usually all towns are like that. If you go over and send them on inspections, they charge for inspection.
And they didn't give me any inspections. They said, I'm assuming you're gonna approve them, so they said, I have to pay 1 inspection, and either the plumber and the electrician split one, or one of them gotta pay another. So they, two inspections, $50 a piece.
And if that inspection fails,
Then someone's gotta pay a third one if he's gotta go back up.
okay,
Yeah, and this is a $4,000 bathroom remodel, and I got $220 in permits set up already.
You're making money.
wow. So you want us to get out?
Yeah, I'm just telling you that
I think we're working on 2 rivers. They don't have an inspector.
no.
Part-time.
They haven't for a while.
Well, they have somebody, part-time, because we had an inspection today.
Yeah, it's somebody from Kiwani.
It's a
Yeah,
private
it's an older
inspector
guy.
that they hire
Oh,
out.
that white-haired guy?
Yeah, I can't, there's a couple townships.
Okay.
And 2 rivers. But they have somebody. I asked for Thursday afternoon, he came today,
So they're gonna go back again, 'cause we were-
Which Thursday afternoon?
the week.
Just a couple more things. I just put this in here. The cross-connection control, that's more of a plumbing issue that was implemented by the DNR. So it was mandated that the municipalities take care of that stuff. So it's another load that is on our plumbing inspector. And There's, I call it night work. Public property, there's 6, what they call standing committees. You get a council, common council of 10 members, and there's 6 committees off of that council, and one of them is the Public Property and Safety Committee. Building inspector is the secretary of that committee, and they meet like sometimes 3 times a month. Yeah. Zoning Board of Appeals, that one I wanted to touch on a little bit because that Zoning Board of Appeals is something that you can go to if, for instance, I'll give you kind of a ridiculous scenario, but this actually happened somewhere in the state, and it's a state law, it's not a local law. If you have a situation where you want to put an addition on your house, and depending upon what zone you're in, if the setbacks that are required aren't, if you're going to encroach into that setback, and you say, I need to put a bedroom addition on, I've got a 3-bedroom house and I've got 6 kids. And I don't know if those are exact, but this is what the scenario was. They denied that appeal because the biggest criteria with the Zoning Board of Appeals is you have to show a hardship. And they kind of said that, yeah, well, it wasn't anybody else's fault but yours that you made more kids. So I heard that was denied. So you really, really have to have a hardship. So we allowed one, or I shouldn't say we. I don't have a vote in it, but I'm there because I'm the one that denied the appeal. So then it goes to this committee up on Revere Drive, where there was a single-car garage, and it's those houses along Revere Drive there, east of the cemetery. And he had a dilapidated garage, and he wanted to put a new garage up. Well, he wouldn't have had room to pull his car into the garage without encroaching into the side yard setback. So the board allowed him, they gave him it was a substandard lot, so that means it's a small lot to begin with. And then, so a substandard lot, you can reduce the setbacks by 25 feet. 25%. So that gave him, I think they allowed him it was less than the 18 inches. That's what it was. It was a 6-foot side yard setback requirement. And because it's substandard, he can go down to 4.5 feet. But they allowed him to go I think it was almost 2 feet, because he couldn't get his car in the garage. Plus he wanted to attach it to the house. So they looked at that as, it's kind of a hardship. So. Then there's the Plan Commission. That Plan Commission, typically in the past, what goes to the Plan Commission, whatever the Plan Commission decides, that's a pretty powerful committee. In the past, the council has pretty much listened to the Plan Commission because they're the ones that discuss the whole thing. But that's kind of turned around in the last couple of years. There's been votes against what the Plan Commission referred to. Code Review, Handicap Appeal Commission, Building Board of Appeals, those don't meet too often. And then, of course, if we do issue citations, sometimes they get contested and we have to go into municipal court, and that's kind of a half-a-day shot. I hate that part. It's just not fun. So, and then documentation. Everything we do is documented. Pretty much everything. In case we have to go to court. So, and I got a call just the other day. Seagulls. Seagulls are nesting on the roof of the old mall again. So, guess who takes care of that?
I would help with that. I can help.
You can help?
I can help.
Well, I gotta call, how? Need a permit for that.
Really?
Yep,
You issued that?
it's a protected species.
You issued that permit?
No, that's the state level.
Oh, okay.
But the guy called me back today, he said he's on it. They got all the necessary permits. Last year, the year before, we got complaints from the surrounding neighbors about the seagulls. So it took quite a bit of an effort on our part to force the guy to do something about it. But finally he did. And he went to the I think it was DNR, went to the DNR to get something to take care of the eggs so they wouldn't hatch. But the seagulls were still there. So he got this, I don't know what it's called. It's a little device hooked onto a propane tank that every specified amount of time, it gives a blast. Bam! Like a shotgun or something. Well, guess what the neighbors did? What do you tell them?
Can't win.
So anyway, he's on it this year. He called me back. I got a voicemail from him today. He says, got all the necessary permits. And
Rick, there's a group of, I'll call them professional builders that believe that we should maybe consider independent inspectors because of the amount of workload and, you know, the cost to the city and so on and so forth. Do you want to speak to that? I mean, I personally have my own feelings, that's not what they are, but
I could kind of sum it up, in my opinion, in one line, and that's, you'll get your inspections. But if that inspector is busy, you know, the code allows us 48 hours to get there. So it's going to be more preparation on your time, because when you call for an inspection and we know your situation, if, gosh, the drywallers are coming tomorrow, you know, and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If I can, this is the way we used to do it with a full staff, we would be there. And now with independence, it's got 48 hours. So it's rescheduling your stuff. And you're not gonna, in my opinion, you're not gonna get the service. You know, you guys are still gonna need the zoning stuff. You wanna put an addition on, how far do I have to stay away from this lot line? Things like that. Somebody's still gonna have to look that stuff up. And we're still gonna need someone for the housing code issues. And someone's gonna have to implement and be in charge of those inspectors, of, you know, who they would put that on, I don't know. So, Sturgeon Bay, from what I understand, went to independent, and they got rid of them. And now they're back to municipal inspectors. And you don't know who you're getting. You know, at least you can all not like me. And you know you don't like me. So, that's about all I have. Any more questions? Hey, remember, be alert today, and alive tomorrow. Be safe.
I'm going to get Kelly set up while I'm setting up her PowerPoint. While I'm setting up her PowerPoint, if you'd like to get up and get anything to drink or anything like that, please feel free to do so. We'll get started again in a couple minutes.
One more thing I wanted to mention. Some handouts here. We do have a new schedule for inspections and walk-in time in our office. So it's all on here. Just pick one up.
It'll be on the table right over there. Yeah.
And these two, pick these up and do it.
So what we're going to go over, they asked us to do an OSHA update. Well, when you talk about what's new with OSHA, it's always going to go back to regulatory and what are the new regulations, what's going on within OSHA. A lot of people don't even know what that process is, so I thought what we'd do is we'd show you what the regulatory process is so that when somebody says something's coming, you can sit back and go, okay, that'll take them about 15 years to get it through. And you'll see why, because we did this with GHS. GHS was 12 years. So we're going to go over regulatory agenda, the emphasis programs. That's the reason that OSHA can come and conduct the inspection at your job site. Under the OSHA Act, under Section 8, it gives us emphasis programs. What those are based on are the BLS numbers that come in. What are the high fatality industries? What's killing people and what's injuring people? That's where they put the emphasis. Those are brand new every year, but normally they're the same story. We have trenches for construction, fall protection. The newest thing with the falls is this year for 2013. Under the fall emphasis program, OSHA will now inspect your ladders. Because what they did is they went back and they did a 10-year study. And out of the fatalities that occur for falls, 82% of those were off of ladders. That's saying 18% were, that's all that was not off of a ladder is 18%. We've had, it's all about that 9 to 12 foot range too. So where they're trying to go with this by doing the ladders under the emphasis program is try to get away from working on ladders and use ladders just for egress to exit and enter your facility, you know, wherever you have to go. A lot of times when we're working, we don't center right on the ladder. We say that, oh, it's off the ladder. It's so simple. Everybody can do it. Nobody's going to get hurt. What happens is we set that task and then they always reach over and that center of gravity goes to the opposite end. That's when the ladder tilts, or if the feet aren't on it, that's where the accident happens. Under the new regulations, where we're at, hazard communication, 5 months ago, GHS was enacted. So you guys have till December of this year to train your employees on global harmonization. What that is that's the change to the HAZCOM standard. And all that changed, guys, it's mostly for the manufacturers and the distributors. You guys as the recipients. So you just have to train on the MSDS sheets, but they've changed the name to call them SDSs. It's an MSDS sheet. It's the exact same thing. What they did is they put it into a standard template. How many of you know where to look in your MSDS sheet? If OSHA comes on and says, what's the first aid requirements for this? What do you have to do for treating with first aid? Do you know where to look in that MSDS sheet? Under this new one, you will. First aid is always going to be Section 4. You'll never have to do any other section. Section 4 is first aid. Section 8 will always be PPE. So no matter what you're doing, if they ask you what your PPE is, you always go to Section 8. When you go through the PowerPoint, because we're kind of shorted on time, I want to give you the really important stuff and then we'll go through the flip. But for the global harmonization, it's training on the new SDS sheet. It should make things a lot easier because with HAZCOM, we had to do that training every year anyway. Nothing has changed in the 1200 standard really, some minor terminology. The big change has been from MSDS sheets to the SDS. And what the change is they went from the manufacturers of every different chemical you had making their own MSDS sheet, the way that they wanted to do it, so all of yours were different and you had no consistency, to now all of the SDS sheets globally are under the same template. So no matter where your product comes from, it will have this standardized SDS. 16 sections. That's it. When we're looking at the regulatory agenda, the new stuff that's coming through, the Injury and Illness Prevention Program. We talked about this last year when I came up and did the update. Where it's gone is they're pushing the Injury and Illness Prevention Program. What they want, it's not that you have to have this huge written safety and health program. You have to have identified the hazards related to the task that your employees are going to do. So you don't have to cover everything. What your company is exposing the employees to, you have to have developed a job hazard recognition so you know this is the PPE that's required when they're doing it, or this is the engineering that we're going to do when we do this task. We're not going to use ladders, we're going to use scissors lists. Whatever you decide for that task, I2P2 says that you put it in writing and the employees know where to go to find it. So what that's doing is that's taking a lot of that willfulness out of your citations because you're training your employees, you're putting it down in paper, you're saying when you do task A, this is what you'll wear and do. When you do task B, this is how you'll do it. So it states black and white. It's not real gray where a lot of OSHA is fuzzy and you can do this or that. I2P2 simply states that for the occupation or industry that you're doing, you will have a job hazard recognition for each task that it takes for a worker to do that task completely. Does that make sense? A lot of people probably do JHSs already. Confined space in construction. We've been using the confined space from general industry for the standards as far as permit required confined space and just actually naming a confined space what it is. I don't think that this will ever go through. I'll show you where it sits in the regulatory agenda, but there's just so many different derisions that they can do for that. You're not, and construction is not industry, you're not a set confined space. Those confined spaces move and change as you do building and construction, so you don't have, it's not a one size fits all, where industry, they pretty much have that in the scopes there. I mean, we do confined space in construction, but how they're basing it off of industry, it's working out just fine. Why do we want to make more rules to it? Go ahead.
Just a question, because my insulator says they have to do confined spaces in attics
Yep.
when they do a spray foam attic seal.
Yes, they
So
do.
one guy goes up and sprays the attic seal, and the other guy has to stand by the hole and watch him.
Right, because what it is he's only got the one entry and exit. So he's got to have somebody there so that they know he's up there, and if he passes out or is overcome, that they can grab him out. Infectious diseases, that's a CDC thing more for healthcare, but they're pretty excited. Electronic reporting, that's your OSHA 300 logs. Does everybody have their 300A posted at their office? Do we know what a 300A is? That's your OSHA injury and illness reporting log. By law, the 300A, which is the summary of everything that you've had for the past year, it has to be signed by your company owner and posted from February 1st till April 30th. If it's not, it's a potential $5,000 OSHA penalty. The record keeping standard is for 10 employees or more. So it's only if you have to keep records. If you have less than 10 employees, then you're not covered under the record keeping standard. But if you have to keep records, the 300 has to be posted at this time period. It's the February 1st to April 30th.
Is that only in the offices or is that in the job trailers as well?
You can have it wherever the employees are, wherever they'll see it. What it is it's just it's an acknowledgement that the owner realizes that he's had this type of injuries or illnesses or he has these fatalities. And it's the employees, they can look at that and say, okay, they know what we're doing and they understand, and you can figure out what the changes are going to be. Because that's the 300 log. The 300 log is for you guys. It's not for us. It goes through to BLS. We ask for it when we come because we'll use it the same way you should. If I'm having a lot of cuts, if I'm looking at where they're coming from, are they utility knives? Are they steel studs? What are we doing differently that we're having these injuries now? You get that from the 300 log. You go back to that and go, well, maybe if we enact PPE and have the guys wear gloves, maybe that'll do it. And then you see if that curbs it. But that 300 log, that's your way of tracking and doing your accident investigation and finding out the reason for those injuries and illnesses so that they don't keep reoccurring. And that's where OSHA goes. When we come in and we ask for your 300 log, that's why they're asking for it. They're there to do an inspection. Where they want to start is where the hazards are mostly reported from. So they look at that log, and if it's in the welding area, they're going to go to the welding shop first. If it's in the carpenter shop, they're going to head over to the carpenter shop. They'll still do the inspection, but they're going to go to where the hazards were so they can see if those hazards were corrected. Go ahead.
Is there a magic number of employees that necessitates you keeping that, or do you just have
Yes,
to?
it's for the OSHA record keeping. The law states you have to have 10 employees or more. If you have 10 employees, and part-time employees count as one employee for the OSHA record keeping. So if you have, like the building department, if you put them down to part-time, they still count as a full number for OSHA. So if you have 10 employees at any time, you have to keep the record keeping log. If you're under that, you do not have to keep records unless you get a letter from the Department of Labor. They do send out letters, they come the first week of January, and they'll tell you to keep your records for 2013, January 1st to December 31st. And they'll give you the address to mail those to them. What that is, those are just spot checks, and they want to see things that are going with industry, or where if it's a high hazard industry, they'll send it to some smaller contractors and smaller industry to see what the effects are on the smaller industry too. But you only have to keep that with under 10 employees if you're requested to. So if you don't get a letter from Department of Labor and you have 9 employees, you do not have to keep the OSHA record keeping log. So as a best practice, it would be a good thing to do. But if you don't have the 10 employees, it's not law. You do not have to do it. It's 10 employees or more. When we're getting ready to put out a standard, the latest one that we had was the crane standard. And there's some litigation going on with that right now. But where it is it starts out as just an idea. Somebody decided that this is how we should do it, and we should have a crane standard in construction. Darn good idea. I don't know why it wasn't there 40 years ago. But so we did that. But it took near 9 years for the construction to get a crane standard between all of the times that they put it out. They come up with the idea, that's your preliminary, then they start to write a rule. They think of what we can do, how should we regulate this, what's going to be the safest way for these procedures to go. Then they take that idea and they publish it, and they say, send us in your questions, your answers. What is it, a piece of garbage, and we need to start over. And that's kind of what happened with the crane standard, is they put it out there, and the operators and a lot of the heavy equipment, they wrote in enough that they trashed the whole first one and restarted it again. So they listen, and that goes out. The proposed period's normally 6 to 9 months. Then they go back, they get back and they analyze all of the questions and all of the input that has come to them, and they start writing the final rule. When they're in this publication mode, before they actually publicize the proposed rule, the SBREFA, that's your small business, that's your regulatory committee for your small businesses. They look at the proposed rule, and they get the first dib at the cuts and the different changes that they feel that should be made, because it's going to be, if it's going to be an imposition on the small business person, they're the ones who look at it first to say this will cost too much, or this will be something that's infeasible. So it has to make it past small business before it even comes down to the till it comes down to the analysis. After we get past that period, they go to development of the final rule. They'll publish that so you can see what they're doing. Right now they're doing it with combustible dust, and that's at the small business part. It goes there October of this year. So they've been telling everybody, we're going to have a combustible dust standard. We were saying that 2 years ago. We're only at the SBRF stage right now with it, and it's not even there until October. So the wheels, they move really, really slow. They enforce on 5A1 because there isn't a standard there. So when we have an explosion, the rules that OSHA writes on and the citations they put out there are based on NIOSH and ANSI and best practices that are out there. But OSHA has to write that as a general duty clause. So they write that as a 5A1 citation because we don't have the standard yet. Once they write the standard on combustible dust, then everything will go through there and you'll have the rules and regulations. They haven't even decided what a combustible dust is yet. They're still thinking about it. So they're going on particle size, and it's in Washington. It'll take quite a while for them to figure it out. I'm too low on that totem to go. And then when they finally do the publication, they normally give 3 to 6 months to come into compliance. They'll tell you they're giving you 90 days or 120 days, and then they enforce on that day. So if you remember with the crane standard, they talked about the signalmans and the riggers, that these guys had to be qualified. They gave the 90 days for those guys to get qualified, and then they could enforce. They couldn't enforce until that date came. If you want to track anything, if there's something you're interested in, walking working surfaces, you can get the regulatory agenda. All you do is go to reginfo.gov. You type in Department of Labor. It'll give you all Department of Labor. Just read the OSHA. And it'll tell you where all of those standards are in that 7-step process. So when it's coming to you guys, when it gets to the final rule and then the publication means they're serious and it's coming out. This means it's been through all of the process and they're getting ready to get it out. So that's where you'll see for your rules. So you can go to reginfo.gov. Right now, I went on 30 entries for OSHA. The most interesting was the combustible dust and the confined space for construction, which they can't get past the idea phase yet, so we'll see. This is what it kind of looks like when you go on there, and then what you'll do is you'll highlight the report number, and that'll tell you where it's at. That's the I2P2. So it's telling you right now it's only in the pre-stage. Emphasis programs. These are what could generate an inspection for you. In industry, powered industrial vehicles, you'll see that crosses over to construction too. They won't stop at your job site for a powered industrial vehicle inspection, but if they're there for another reason, they will inspect your vehicles that come under the PIV standard. Backup alarms, broken windows, that's all under. If they come on for something else, they will open on each emphasis that they have. Combustible dust amputations, nursing homes and dairy farms. Nursing homes is brand new, and dairy farms we had all of last year. Got quite a response back on the dairy farms. We didn't do many of the inspections. We only had a certain number for last year, and all of them came back with significant cases pretty much because they didn't do any of the bare minimums that they could have been doing, and they all had over 30 employees. So this isn't mom and dad's farm. This is all of your family, not included, you have 10 employees. So you can have 20 family members and you're not part of anything. It's when you have employees outside of your family that you come under that. So these are your larger farms, and we've had farms that have no HAZCOM program, have no confined space program. So they really do need the instruction of OSHA. They've kind of fell between that hole because of the ag exemption. Now they don't have that exemption, and now OSHA's going in with the emphasis program to make sure that they're starting to do that. Because if you look at different things in the news, Eau Claire, we've had the Hispanic guy that drove the Bobcat into the manure pit, and he drowned because the arm mechanism was broke on it. Electrocutions, we had the guy that was crushed with the gate, the electrician that was doing the work over here in Sheboygan. Milwaukee had a guy in the bullpen. I don't know that I'd ever go on that side of the fence. And I'm not from Wisconsin and don't know animals, but I still wouldn't go on the side where the bull is. But we had a guy that went in on that side and he got trampled. And we're looking, is it a language barrier or is it actual machinery? 80% of it is a language barrier there with agriculture. But so that's being addressed by OSHA. We're also doing federal agencies with the sequestration. I don't see where we're going to be able to. We're kind of like the building inspectors. We're not, OSHA, everything's frozen. There's no hiring. As people retire, those slots freeze. There's nobody put into those slots. Wisconsin, the majority of our inspectors were here 40 years ago, so they're all starting to retire. Those aren't going to get filled until they have a budget and say that they'll fill them. We're the smallest agency within the government. We have, I think we're at 2,100 employees nationwide. Out of that, only 400. There's 390 odd that are inspectors. Everybody else is in DC or an office person. That tells you how political things are. We're not even, the smallest amount are the guys that are actually boots in the field coming out and correcting things. So, so we only have less than 400, and as they retire out, you're not going to have them. Our Appleton office, we no longer do programmed inspections because we don't have the personnel to do the programmed inspections in construction. We do them in general industry still. There's still targeting lists for general industry. But in construction right now, there is no Dodge list. The money was frozen under sequestration for the University of Tennessee. So there has been nothing issued for April. We had the programmed inspections for March. Those that were gone to are done. Those that haven't been got to, they're no longer valid. So until sequestration ends, there is no targeted inspection for construction. And those were normally your larger jobs anyway, guys. Those are your 22 million, your huge jobs that have got multiple contractors on them. For the small guys, you're not really you're not really part of the whole standardized targeting. Where you guys fall more is into the self-referral. What happens is if you have compliance officers that are going to training or they're going to a job site for a complaint that they've been assigned, and they're driving by and they see the siding guy and he's whatever without fall protection, or the roofers, that's when they stop. And that's when they'll open up with the rest of it. Trenching is another big one. If they see the spoil pile, they have to stop, because trenching is a national emphasis program and they get graded on that. We have to go to as many trenches as we see that are open. When we're looking into construction, silica and lead, building renovations. Last year it started for the first time in Appleton's area. Milwaukee has had it for 5 years. What that is that's your buildings that you're renovating, you're turning them into apartments, they're warehouses. What it does is it gets OSHA in there to do the monitoring. We're getting lab results back from lead and asbestos they haven't even been monitored for. So that's why they're doing this. And how they come into this is mostly by drive-bys. We don't even get the permits that they're gutting something. The gut rehabs, those are by co-shows that are going here or there and coming back. Sheboygan's had quite a few going on, and we have a guy that lives in Sheboygan, so you contractors from Sheboygan, we have a guy that lives right there, so he'll be coming past Sheboygan and Manitowoc to go to Appleton quite a bit. But we try to tell him to cut up where that Fond du Lac way, go Oshkosh and then up, but still. I live in Reedsville. My husband does construction. He's a carpenter, but anyway. So yeah, we try to get him to go that way. So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just joking. It's facetious. I don't mean it. So the U10, the Dodge report, pretty much that's a blank right now. So you don't have to, there's nothing going on with that U10. But my key for you guys would be the building renovation. If you're doing any gut rehabs, make sure you're pulling the monitoring and getting that done before you even start the job site and get people in. The PIVs, if you're going to use the rough terrain forklifts or you bought somebody's that's like 50 years old, make sure you have the manufacturer's guide on it. You know what the lift load is. If you're, God forbid, you're going to use it for rigging and lifting something up, make sure that you know where the center of gravity is, and when that compliance officer comes out to you and he's talking to you about the chain and the rigging that you're using, if you're going to do that, you have the answers for him. So if you choose to use the PIV as a modified crane or to do however you want to do for your lifting, because it's legal, you can do that, but that employee has to know why he's doing it and how he's preventing it from coming off the forks. I say that because that's one of the frequently written citations right now. It used to be the baskets, but everybody kind of figured out that you can't use a 16-foot basket on an 8-foot wheelbase. It kind of works like a diving board. So we don't see a lot of those. We still see some, but we don't see many. And we don't see a lot of the scaffolds on the hay wagons too much. You see them a couple of times. So we've got that. Do you guys have any questions for me as we go through? The biggest thing for you guys, residential construction. The CPL that gave you guys the exemptions for fall protection, it finally expired March 15, 2013. 17 years. The last 18 months, it's been rescinded, but Washington has kept extending that period and extending that period. That has expired. No matter where you're working, you have that fall height of 6 feet, just like everybody else. So if you're working on a roof that's 9 feet up, you have to have fall protection, either the guardrail system or a personal fall arrest, whatever you guys choose to do, but you got to do something. And they are enforcing on it now. March 15th is when they first started going out where they would write citations based on the rule. Does everybody understand that they no longer have the exemption? Because they're not going to give you any leeway. You're not going to be able to say, oh, I thought it was extended, because that had so many extensions in there. You've got people that are right ready, and it's you guys calling on each other. We get so many complaints from a contractor that didn't get a contract. He's got us on speed dial.
He's not here.
That worked out well. So they're working on isocyanate. That's pretty much the spray liners, the bed liners for the trucks and your equipment that you have. Workplace violence. We are inspecting on this. We never used to go out for workplace violence. We do not have a standard on workplace violence. What is cited is 5A1. but we have a huge influx of these assisted living centers, and they have dementia units. We have a lot of healthcare that's getting seriously injured just going to work. And we have a little bit where it's employee and worker on worker, but it's mostly patient to caretaker. And if that facility isn't getting on that and correcting that so that their workers are not being harmed, that's when OSHA will come in and do the inspection, and they'll make sure that they're taking a process so that that's not going to happen. They want to correct that. The other thing that they look for in that is the retail industry, like your gas stations, your quick trips, stuff like that. That's your late night industry. GHS we talked about real quick. The things that affect you are going to be the SDS sheets and the labels. The SDS sheets, employee training, and container labeling are all one basic. If you do it, you've got all three covered. The training for you guys has to be done by December 2013. You have to train on the new SDS sheets and the new labels. Nothing in the 1200 has really changed, so your training, all of that, everything in 1200 pretty much stands the way it is. There's not been any, couple little terminology, but nothing that really affects the standard itself. The things that have changed is the type of labels that you're going to be using and the type of SDSs that you're going to be receiving. When you're looking at your labeling system, a lot of people use the NFPA triangles or diamonds. The coding is different for GHS than it is under that old NFPA. So that you'll have to look into if that's something that you're doing, because you do have to change those, and those have to correspond with the new GHS numbers, the new coding. But you can still use that if you choose. What the changes have been for the labels are kind of like the SDS. What they've done is they want you to put the product identifier on the label so that if something happens, EMS is there, they can just pick up it, and they'll have a phone number for the maker of that chemical that they can call if they have any questions. So that identifier is right on the label. The signal words are the, watch out or danger, whatever you have. The big thing with the pictograms, they're doing that for the non-English so that the red draws the attention and the picture is supposed to be global. You can be Portuguese and understand what the symbol of the picture is. Those are your biggest changes for labels. So they look different. The thing that is confusing that changes is, again, the classifications. If you're going to use the NFPA diamonds or the HMIS, you can get with me after. You can look at the standard. It's online. But they changed the classifications where 0 normally meant it was green and you could drink the stuff and nothing had really happened. Now that is a 4, and it's like extremely hazardous and dangerous. And a 4 means it's okay. So we've gone 40 years telling you the opposite of that and what they've adopted. That's your government at its best. But that's where you're at. So yeah, so that's where the training's going to come in, is going to be the labels that you're doing and the SDSs that you receive. 4 labels, if you have there and you're going to take it out of the container, make a photocopy of the label that you have, and you can just tape it onto the bottle or whatever you're doing. And you have it and you're in compliance. There's not a big deal. The marker doesn't work good anymore because you have to have the identifiers and all that on there. But have something. Don't have it empty. The red borders are required. They don't let you do any blank spaces. Like in HMIS, you could leave part of the diamond blank. You can't do that. The pictogram takes up the whole thing. There's no blank space. The data sheets we went over, 16 sections. Pretty much the same thing. They just changed the name from MSDS to SDS. There's no difference there. The template has changed. Here's your template. These are the 16 sections of the SDS. I pointed out earlier the 4 is always going to be first aid. 8 is always going to be PPE. These will never change. Those are your 16 sections of the SDS. Every single one you get will be like this. They have 2 years to change the SDSs over. A lot of them are changed already, but there are still some that you're going to get that are not current with this just yet. But they will. They just gave them more time for the manufacturers to get them. This is what it's going to look like. The sections are pretty straightforward for you. 4 is always first aid. 8 is always going to be PPE. And it's going to be plain like that. They'll be identified really large so that you can figure it out and see it. They used to say HAZCOM was the right to know. They're saying GHS is the right to understand. They've brought this down to a 4th grade level. You should be able to go off of the plain wording. That's what I was told. That's the outreach.
I'm out.
That's where we're going. December 1st, 2013. You have to have the employees trained in the new labels, the different elements of the labels, which is basically what we just talked about. It's going to have the chemical manufacturer's identifier on it. It's going to have the pictograms. And you have to train them on the new SDS format. That's it. Bring them in, sit them down, go over an SDS, tell them, you know, if OSHA comes on, 4 is always going to be first aid, 8 is always going to be PPE. A compliance officer, that's pretty much what they're going to ask your employees. They're going to ask what PPE is required or what's the first aid. They need to understand all 16 sections. But if I were a small company owner, my background is I come from construction. My folks owned a construction company in Chicago. If I were an owner of a construction company, my employees would be brought in and I'd tell them on a little laminated card, like we used to do the 800 numbers, give them a laminated card that says, you know, what the sections are, but in red put first aid is 4 and PPE is 8, because with this being a new standard, you can bet no matter when OSHA comes on your site, your HAZCOM program is going to be reviewed and they're going to look for the SDSs on site. When they do that, they're going to grab an employee and they're going to ask them, for this chemical, what is the PPE? The employee has to be able to look at that SDS and tell them what the proper PPE is for that chemical. The trends, well, they're trending up. We've got less compliance officers with greater numbers that they want to achieve. Last year, 219 sick cases. A sick case is any OSHA case over $100,000 that's issued out. And they're going to be using repeat. We have a new software system within the government that links all of the states. So not only do we see federal OSHA, but we now see Michigan OSHA, Minnesota OSHA. We now see